One of the most important figures of the Jewish people is actually a woman, and her name is Ruth. Because think about it, our Jewish aspiration is for the Messiah to come, and we do everything possible to bring the Mashiach. But who does the Mashiach descend from? From King David, of course. But King David descends from a woman who at first wasn't even Jewish. She was a Moabite, and her name is Ruth. That's why studying the book of Ruth is so crucial, not only to learn about the roots of where we come from, but also about where we are going. What is everything that the book of Ruth contains? It's something that will give us the key to understand what is the process that we in Judaism must go through in this connection, in this case, between a Moabite woman and the nations of the world and Israel. That's why I have a person who is an expert, and in my opinion, without a doubt, one of the greatest experts in Latin America on the subject of the relationship of Jews with other Jews. And he is Rabbi Ariel Groisman, who has decades of experience teaching the universal laws of Judaism and is a rabbi at the temple in El Paso. He has also studied in yeshivot, that is Jewish study centers in Israel, of the highest level in Vincent, Sfat, and other places. And Rabbi Groisman, welcome to our channel. I will not only share the contact information so you can get in touch with Rabbi Groisman, who has many study series, but also so you can check out other videos that we have made as well. Raf, welcome, and I would like to talk now about the Book of Ruth, which begins on the festival of Shavuot, which is traditionally when we read the Book of Ruth. How would you start to introduce this topic to people, given how important it is?
Shalom, shalom, Jacob, and to everyone who is watching the video. Of course, the biblical story from the Book of Ruth is a moving, fascinating story where the main character is a woman, Ruth, who made the entire journey back to her roots and joined the Jewish people, the people of Israel, becoming the great-grandmother of King David, from whom the seed of the Mashiach will come. In other words, the book of Ruth, written by the prophet Shmuel, is part of the writings of the scriptures of the Tanakh, because it not only has many messages, but it also shows us something crucial, which is that anyone can join, if they want to, the people of Israel by following certain rules. And is much of the law of joining the people of Israel learned from this book? Without a doubt, we're talking about around 2,400 years ago, in the time of the judges, that is, a proto-state period in the land of Israel. This was long before the kings, and in the towns of Yehuda there was a great famine. The people of Israel were in a dire situation. And one of the leaders of that time, named Elimelech, who was also the landowner, owned all the fields. And his people required him to share part of his wealth from grains, especially wheat and barley, with his brothers. He, in his greed, escaped with his family to the most despicable, farthest place, to Moab. Ruth came from there, from Moab. Moab it was to the east. It was a kingdom that was to the east of the Jordan, beyond what is called the Dead Sea. And in that nation, especially, the Torah forbids people from that place to be part of the people of Israel, because historically they had a visceral hatred for the people of Israel and an absolute contempt. That's why the Torah forbade Moabite men from joining the people of Israel. But let's take a step back. Who was Ruth? Ruth was a princess from a nation that was an enemy of the people of Israel, but her origin traced back to Abraham, who had Abram. Abram had his injector, a great spirituality in all the nations. Abram was truly the father of monotheism and implanted the seed of goodness and absolute monotheism in tens of thousands of people who, over the course of generations, were dispersed. The souls that Abram made, and one of these souls, these spiritual sparks, was the soul of Ruth, which was. In turn, she was the granddaughter of Balak, a great enemy of the people of Israel, who in turn came from the seed of Lot, that is, from Abram. At one point, Ruth returned to the people of Israel. That spark of Abram returned to his people through a fascinating story that we are going to see.
One of the great mysteries is that if people read, the Torah says, don't marry a Moabite in Spanish. Well, you can't translate it exactly here because the Bible, and precisely for that reason, you have study series, and these details, for someone who doesn't study it in Hebrew, go unnoticed, that it is written in the Torah that you shouldn't marry a Moabite. But then, how does Ruth get married if she is a Moabite? If the Torah forbids it, that is exactly the question to ask.
Well, it started with Boaz, the head of the Sanhedrin. We'll see that later in the story, but basically the Torah gives us a reason for that. Why couldn't the Moabite people, who are obviously extinct today, be part of the people of Israel? Because in the desert, when the people of Israel, the emancipated slaves, were exhausted, they didn't come out to meet them with bread and water, which was the minimum notion of humanity that should be offered to those in need. This ungrateful and greedy nation, so greedy and avaricious, those qualities and tendencies could not be part of the kind people descended from Abraham. From this, the sages deduced that those who went out to deliver this food were generally the men, not the women. In other words, the women could be included, but the men could not. This law had been received from Sinai, but it was forgotten. And in the time of Ruth, this law was remembered and put into effect. It was activated for the first time because no one from a nation that was an arch enemy of Israel had ever joined the people before. It was only Ruth who had that spark that Abraham had planted centuries ago, which returned to its roots. Therefore, the verse states they returned from Moab's fields to Jerusalem. This is the path shown by all the people who join our people, that when they complete the process, it becomes evident that the souls that were originally among the people and over the centuries, providence caused them to go to different places and then return. Now, Ruth was not an ordinary Moabite woman, but she had very high moral standards. In fact, the word Ruth in Hebrew Resh Vav Tav has a numerical value of 606. Why 606? If there are 613 precepts, 7 of the 613 precepts, which are the Noahide precepts, she already fulfilled. In other words, she was a practicing Noahide. She was a righteous among the nations with monotheistic awareness, with kindness, with sensitivity to her surroundings. And this is what the book shows in the first chapters. I'm going to start developing the story a bit. Elimelech, this landowner from the tribe of Judah, who in turn was the son of one of the aristocrats of the people, was an ancestor of Nahshon, son of Aminadab from the tribe of Judah. The first one who threw himself into the Sea of Reeds to open it came from a lineage of sages, saints, aristocratic people from the tribe of Judah. And in himself, he was the greatest example of the wealth and kindness of the people of Israel. He was called upon during times of famine. He escaped, he fled, he ran to the most abject place on earth, which was full of corruption and degeneration, which was Moab, and lacking any spiritual awareness. In this place, it was certain that his 2 sons, Mahol and Kilion, would meet and marry non-Jewish women from this nation, who were Ruth and Orpah, 2 sisters, Ruth and Orpah. And his wife Naomi also accompanied them. God wanted those above to fall below for having cut that bond of brotherhood with the people of Israel. God punished them with famine and extreme poverty. Elimelech died before his time, and his sons Mahol and Kilion also died, leaving the 3 women behind. Naomi, the Israelite mother-in-law, and the 2 Moabite sisters who were not Israelites, Ruth and Orpah. And here comes the point. Given this situation, that they were in utter need, facing famine and hardship, without the male provider of the house and without leadership, and despised by their 2 sisters, by their own people, Moab, who came from a betrayal of connecting with the archenemy Israelites. Here comes a verse that begins the conversion and social integration. That is basically discovering the spiritual root in Ruth's conversion, where the mother-in-law Naomi tells her, "Go to your people, return to your roots." And there she says to both of them, to both daughters-in-law, to Ruth and to Orpah. Orpah did agree to return to her roots. But here, in the first chapter of this book of Ruth, which has 4 chapters, 85 verses, in chapter 1, verse 17, it tells us, well, a little before that, it tells us very clearly, and Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you, for where you go, I will go. Where you live, I will live. Your people are my people, and your God is my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me." Seeing that Ruth was so determined and insisted on going with her, Naomi stopped urging her. This is the first attitude of a person who comes to join the Jewish people. A total willingness to tie their destiny to where the people of Israel are, to live with them and dwell among them, the practices and customs. There are 4 levels, which are: where you live, I will live; where you go, I will be there; your people are my people, and your God is my God. The most absolute monotheism, observing the precepts and tying their destiny to the people of Israel, seeing this absolute resolution. At that moment, Naomi didn't insist that she leave her. We see here that at first the candidate for conversion should be discouraged. But Naomi saw, the mother-in-law saw, that Ruth was so determined and made such an effort to go with her that she decided to admit her at the gates of integration.
Or would you consider in that case that Ruth is like that archetype of conversion to Judaism, which in fact I would put it another way: do Jews still convert people, or do we still accept people into Judaism just as was done in that time by fulfilling those parameters, which are the ones you just mentioned, like following the destiny of the Jewish people, etc.? I think it's very important to point out because there's this myth of extreme separation among Jews. And in fact, I invite you to watch the video we have with Raphael Groisman precisely about conversions. I'm sharing it with you because there we clarify topics that are very taboo, very difficult as well, that many people face. To what extent could it be a scam, maybe, that someone sells you a conversion, or whether a conversion is valid or not? Maybe they're not scamming you, but maybe it's not even recognized by Israel. We've already discussed this, and Ruth is definitely a pioneer on the topic. So Raf, how does it develop then once Ruth joins? Happy ending.
Of course, at that moment they travel, immigrate, and return to the land of Israel. And here it's very important. The person who actually, conversion is a term we use, but the more accurate word is ger or joret, the one who comes to live with us, the one who adopts our traditions. In the case of Ruth, even more so, she is the one who returns to her roots. That's why the verse in the same chapter 1 says, they return from the fields of Moab. She regained her spiritual spark from Abraham, the spark of kindness and absolute monotheism towards her original people. And that's what she lives and experiences in the process of community integration called conversion. In this case, when Ruth returned, she was a princess of Moab, and she became a servant in the fields of Boaz. Boaz was the head of the Sanhedrin, the court. She was just another servant who wanted a servant's life. However, at the end of her days, she had great wealth. As the sages say, whoever fulfills the Torah in poverty will end up in wealth. And Ruth and the Eternal, at the end of her days, as we will see, made Ruth very, very long-lived, and she lived such a long life. The sages say that she lived 172 years, and she was able to see her offspring, her great-grandson and great-great-grandson. King David establishing the eternal capital of the people of Israel in Jerusalem, and King Shlomo building the sanctuary and being king of the people of Israel. The process of integration was that she began to work in Boaz's field. Boaz was the head of the Sanhedrin, of the court, also of the aristocracy of the people of Israel, who was a relative of Naomi. And in that case, seeing this attitude, already the days. Wealth as before, taking a wife and warning others to stay away. To take part of the portions that are destined for the wise, widows, orphans, those who come to join the people of Israel. She already fulfills it. She ended up wealthy. The first step was that she was a Gyoret Toshav, a resident citizen, assuming the duties of the people. And Israel and social services, as the verse says, Hi Ajijima, your brother will live with you. So Boaz, by fulfilling this law, provided her with all the support she needed: shelter, food, clothing, refuge, and she also learned all the regulations of the people of Israel, the rules of dignity and sanctity, and ended up with dignity in interpersonal relationship and acts of kindness and wealth. And her mother-in-law, who cared for her and the people, and she spent some time learning the ways of the Eternal, and she spent some time learning the customs of the place. The foundational act is a process. First, the entire founding act, that is, it's a process. First of all, it begins with a decision about her nation and her homeland, and to tie her destiny to the people of Israel, and then a process of learning, to the point that Boaz took her for himself, preserving the family name, so that Elimelech's lineage would not be left scattered. He took her for himself, married her, and she went from poverty to wealth, becoming absolutely part of the people of the Eternal. In the final act, the elders, she ended up being just another Israelite, and it was permitted to marry her. This is what chapters 2 and 3 describe. I really love how Judaism always gives people so much potential.
The Eternal always gives people a great capacity to improve, to not stay stagnant, to achieve, to not just sit with arms crossed, It's like the story of Rabbi Akiva is going through my mind. And to give some context, building the family background of Rabbi Akiva, it was that non-Jews joined the people of Israel. And a person like Rabbi Akiva, who at a very late age wanted to start learning to read, ended up studying with 6-year-old children. Ruth, though embarrassed as an adult, showed strong determination and became one of literature's most notable sages. Wealth, and he goes from and he decides to go down to the lowest, to famine, to the other nation. From the other nation, the nation where historically the Jews have also been persecuted, and to decide to make that leap and start moving forward again, I find it very admirable and a great example for anyone who's on the path in general of the Torah. Of course, people who seek a better world, it ended up being in wealth. That giving up and so many things that can be learned from just a few verses, I find it wonderful. And to finish, there are 2 more points I want to make. First, his admiration for the people of Israel. Admiration implies a reverential fear towards the entire tradition of
the people of Israel and towards the Eternal One, absolutely feeling very small. In fact, this is the first thing that the Jewish code of law indicates. When the end of Israel, it says, building the people of Israel ended up being persecuted. And the person says, I know that I am not even worthy to be part of this people, with a level of submission and humility. In that case, it is accepted. Wealth, and this is what the verse says, chapter 2, verse 10 in Ruth. She bowed before Boaz, bent down to the ground, and said to him, why have I found favor in your eyes that you take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? The submission she had was that she didn't even feel worthy of being part of the people. She wanted to be, but that level of anxiety and expectation is what is expected from a person who is coming to join. Boaz answers her, I have been told everything you have done for your mother-in-law. All the acts of charity, kindness, and companionship worthy of the seed of the people of Israel after the death of her husband, and how you have left your father, your mother, and the land where you were born, the complete abandonment of your traditions, just like Abraham, who left his traditions and followed the eternal. Just like all those who come to join the people of Israel who abandon their traditions. Days building the Santeria finished his legacy, and they come to tie their destiny to the people. And are you seeking wealth? They tie their fate to these people. You have come to a people you did not know before. May God reward you. That's the verdict, Boaz. May your reward be complete from the eternal God of Israel. You will be part of the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. This text, Asher bat lech lakasot tachak nafav, you come to take refuge under the wings of the divine presence. It is a term that is being constructed in Santeria. The Midrash portrays her as a helpless chick that seeks shelter, seeks protection, seeks refuge. God says all of Ruth is also an absolute example. And after marrying Boaz, they conceived and had a child, to the eternal of Israel. God wanted divine providence, the spark of Abraham that he inserted 700 years earlier in their history, to travel through the course of generations and days, building what was once idolatry, which ended up becoming wealth. Incorporating into David the aristocracy, wisdom, and legacy of the tribe of Judah from Boaz. And the humility and submission of someone who comes from outside to integrate with all the effort that implies, from Ruth, indicating the highest elevation in piety, wisdom, and lineage, with the greatest humility that King David embodied. And those will be the signs of the Mashiach. Mashiach is not only going to be one, those are the signs of the Mashiach. And that's why God of the days, and with meaning, those are the signs of the Mashiach. And that's why God made it, so that from the Santeria, the Redeemer of Israel ended up coming out.
What strikes me is that one of the many myths I encounter on social media is the claim that you are not real Jews. Biblical Jews don't exist because why? You see that there are Jews of all colors, of all, let's say, ethnicities, you could say of all races. But the Bible itself actually debunks that myth, as you just explained. Ruth, a Moabite, and from her the Messiah will come. I find that revolutionary. There's that story that the Ashkenazim come from the Khazars. No, scholarship has already debunked that claim. But even if they did come from the Khazars, which is totally legitimate, if the Khazars converted, they would have been accepted and would have been Jews. If King David's great-grandmother and his descendant, the Messiah, are in the same narrative, it already disproves that anti-Jewish idea. As you can see, it was always present. And something you reminded me of, Rav, is that I'm now reading this book called The Excellencies of the Hebrews by Dr. Itzhak Cardoso, who was a person who lived in Spain in the 17th century, and he was part of the monarchy. I mean, he was a Christian in the monarchy, but was he truly Jewish or just hiding because of the Inquisition? And he decides to take off that disguise and escapes to Venice. And there he starts from, I mean, he goes from that aristocracy to the bottom, and he writes a phrase that you mentioned. He says, the Jews are, and that's what Cardoso thinks, what he sees around him. They are people from the king's court and all the Christian intellectuals of his time, Lope de Vega and all of them. And he describes the Jews by saying, the Jews are shy, humble people with a calm voice. In other words, he describes them exactly as Ruth is expected to be, or as a Jew is expected to be. So I'm glad that Cardoso has the precedent, which is obviously Ruth, and that he is a redeemer of the books. That's why they are so important. Raf, as we wrap up, what final point would you make? And again, I encourage everyone to reach out to Rabbi Ariel Groisman or visit his social media for the classes available on this topic. Ruth, King David's great-grandmother, was an ancestor of the Redeemer and Mashiach. David is described with humility. Who am I, Israel?
Who am I before my brothers? And I am going to rule over the people of Israel. Look at my warrior brothers and me. The verse clearly states that God looks at people's hearts, while people see only the surface, like where someone is from or how Jewish they appear. God knows what is in the soul of each person, and spiritual sparks transcend all skin, all color, all ethnicity, every continent, and every era. Everyone who is rooted in the souls of Israel.
Go like Ruth to God. Let those who love him leave for good. And well, Rav, thank you very much. And with God's help, may people understand that process. And again, hear the Rav. I don't have to clarify it because Rav Groisman basically says it in all his talks. Even though we've just talked a lot about conversion and all that, Jews have never aimed to proselytize. It's not because we're now encouraging people to convert by giving them these tips. Although, again, I have a video with Rav Groisman with the tips and the topic of how the conversion process works. Even so, the goal is for each person to be good. The Noahide laws that Rav Groisman himself mentioned, that Ruth followed, and well, that we managed to make a better world. Thanks to Rav for participating.
Thank you very much, and a blessing for the whole audience. Since we are close to Shavuot, which is the biblical festival where we remember that 3,338 years ago, we received the revelation of God at Sinai. May we receive the Torah with joy and inner depth. Amen for all.